Um, we want to show that Tokyo's startup ecosystem is every bit as passionate and every bit as dynamic as that in San Francisco or anywhere else. So, especially if I point the mic out, don't hold back. Now, of course, during the introductions and especially during the Kampai, we really want to hear from you. But, hey, during the conversation and during the Q&A, if you want to clap at an answer or laugh at a joke, that's awesome. And if you feel like you want to have a conversation, that's okay too. We just ask you to move back there by the bar so the people around you can enjoy the show. And I just got a thumbs up from our sound man, and that means that he's ready to go when we are. So, are we ready to go? All right, this is going to be great. Welcome to Disrupting Japan. Straight talk from Japan's most successful entrepreneurs. I'm Tim Romero, and thanks for coming out tonight, man. You guys are awesome. Actually, that's exactly what I hear in my head every time I say that line. Now, for our listeners at home, or wherever you may be in podcast land, we've got a special show for you tonight. To celebrate Disrupting Japan's 4th anniversary, we are podcasting live from Super Deluxe in Roppongi with some of the most innovative people on the face of the planet, that is Japan's startup ecosystem. So let everyone get their drinks together for a kampai. And listeners at home, feel free to drink along with us. Over the last 4 years, Disrupting Japan has become bigger and more influential than I ever imagined it could be. Thank you so much for everything you've done to support the show. Thank you for listening. It's been an amazing 4 years, and the next 4 years are going to be even better. So, kampai. Kampai. Now, for these anniversary shows, every year, we have a theme, and this year it is foreign founders in Japan. And right now, we've got some feedback here. Can you pick up the mic? Is that? Hello? Mr. Soundman. Can we just go ahead? All right. So every year we have a theme, and this year it is foreign founders in Japan. And on stage tonight we have four fearless foreign founders who have taken very different roads to developing their companies here in Japan. So with introductions, on my far left is Jay Winder, who has established Make Leaps, which is Japan's leading SaaS invoicing system. And before that, you had another company, but I think a lot of you know Jay for running the Hacker News meetup here in Japan. Woo! Yeah. In the center, we've got Paul Chapman, co-founder and CEO of MoneyTree, which is one of Japan's fastest rising fintech startups, and a true, B2C SaaS success story in Japan. Thanks, Tim.
Pleasure to be here.
And on my immediate left is Casey Wall, the CEO and founder of Wall & Case, which is a recruiting company, which doesn't sound that startup-y to begin with, but Casey's also founded Red Brick Ventures, which was an accelerator that spun out several startups. His company's deeply involved in artificial intelligence projects, and you are now on the long, hard march towards IPO. So you're doing something right.
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay, let's I want to start this out on a positive note. So I'm someone who's of the firm belief there's no real fundamental advantages or disadvantages. It's just differences that you can take advantage of. So what I'd like to lead with is, let's talk about what advantages foreign founders have in Japan. Jay, you want to lead that one off?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you just made, Tim, where there's good things and there's bad things, and at the end of the day, you just have to figure out how to make something work, right? Actually, I think one of my favorite quotes about entrepreneurship that I think is really interesting is, entrepreneurship is the pursuit of a goal without regard to currently held resources, right? And so that means how much money you have in your bank account. It even means how much, your current skill set, right? It even means how society is kind of currently configured right now. You'll have advantages perhaps in some areas, and you won't have advantages in other areas, and you have to understand those things and move forward the best way that you can at the end of the day. So yeah, there's good things and bad things, and it's your job to figure out the bad things and compensate or offset them.
So what are the good things you got working for you as a foreigner?
Novelty, right? Like if you turn up to a meeting, it's like, oh, that foreigner, yeah, what's he doing here? It's like, oh, he's raising money. It's like, oh, really? Well, for what? It's like, oh, an invoicing company to help Japanese companies send invoices. It's like, but he's a foreigner. right? And honestly, that's kind of a fair point, right? I am a foreigner, right? And so, it's from a Japanese person who doesn't understand much about me or Make Leaps to think that somebody could come to Japan, understand all the intricacies of how Japanese companies communicate with each other to the depth where companies would trust that company to put in all their financial details. That's a fair point. So that's something that we need to offset, right, by having a really solid team full of people that are really competent and have a lot of expertise and experience in Japan.
So it kind of just generates that curiosity and makes it easier to start the conversation?
Yeah, that's right. That's
That's
what I'd say.
So Jay, how did you get there?
Yeah.
How did you get there where you can get between the Japanese companies where they, as a foreign founder,
Well, that's a good question, Casey. I'm
where
glad
they
you
can
asked that.
actually trust you well enough to do it? Like, what's the advantage to get to that point?
Yeah,
I would say it's a lot of disadvantages, no?
Sure. So essentially, it is momentum, right? Because I remember when you're first starting out, you're like, hey, I've got this idea. Like, in Japan, people tend to use Microsoft Excel for managing their invoicing, and Microsoft Excel was released in 1982. And it's not really like Microsoft Excel is like traditional Japanese business software, right? Like people just kind of adopted that and started using it for all sorts of different things in Japan. So we're like, hey, we've got a new way of doing things. How about this? And people are like, how about no? How about we just keep doing things the same way we've always done things? It's like, well, okay, fair point, right? So from that point, you have to kind of go out and just get a first customer, right? And just get somebody to use the software. And at that point, you're not even worried about how much money you're making. It's like, will you use this? Will this be interesting for you? Can you, imagine yourself doing this?
When you were doing that, did you ever kind of play on your foreignness? Did you ever kind of say, oh, well, this is how they do it in San Francisco, and you should take a look at it for that reason?
Not so much. I found what's much more convincing is if you get some customers, get some momentum, get some user testimonials from them, and then say, hey, whatever you want to do is fine, but your competitor is doing things now with Make Leaps, and they say it's pretty good, or you don't need to be that direct necessarily, but other companies are starting to adopt this, and it's giving them these benefits, so if you'd like to consider it, we're very happy to give you a demo at your office, kind of thing. And then once you've got enough of that, it's easy to kind of build off that momentum.
Casey, what about you? I mean, obviously it's an advantage when you're selling to foreign companies, but when you're selling directly to Japanese companies, does being a foreigner come with any advantages?
I think the novelty part there and the willingness that you can break rules and you don't mind skipping out some of the processes that a usual Japanese salesperson would go through. You can go straight to the top a lot. Even when I was 25, 24, I can meet big company CEOs. And I don't think you could do that anywhere else, having been a foreigner here in Japan. But I think ultimately kind of where we are with our SaaS products is we need a Japanese sales team to kind of take it through. And we're kind of feeling that at some point we have to hire this Japanese team to work through the Japanese processes, and being a foreigner is a disadvantage to go through large enterprise sales.
Paul?
I would agree with Jay that novelty is useful. You speak Japanese pretty well, right?
Yeah, I think you speak Japanese really well.
I think I'm speaking English now.
Correct.
Sometimes I can't tell. No, but that helps, of course. So if you can speak to people in their own language and you can pattern match as, you know, having a face like this, but everything else kind of more or less is familiar. From the way you hand across a business card, the way you bow. I mean, I learned how to speak bank and act like a banker from our Jokyu Komon, so our senior advisor. The fact that we found a Jokyu Komon, that was because I think we were foreigners, and another foreigner introduced him to us. Daryl, I don't know if you're here. Thank you. And so our Jokyu Komon, our senior advisor, Tsuchihashi-san, was it was at SMBC, so Sumitomo Bank for 40 years, but he lived in North America for 14. And I think my two co-founders, the two other founders of Money Tree, so it's Mark and Ross. Ross is on his honeymoon, so he's not here tonight. We are the exact same age as Tsuchihashi's daughters, the three of us. So we're the three sons he never wanted. Baka no gaijin musuko. No, but you know, it helped. He saw us as kind of not having. We kind of started with a blank slate. He didn't judge us for being this or being that. Like, oh, I think when you come from overseas, you start with a clean record, really heinous. And so that's an advantage. So people will meet with you. And so senior people will meet with us. But what we found was they wouldn't meet with us again. So I got to meet the head of SMCC 6 years ago, but I haven't met anyone that senior at that company.
So that might be the novelty effect playing into it.
That's right, but it doesn't really help you get ahead. It just gives you an interesting experience. I got to go to my first yakuinshitsu, so the first executive lounge, which is lots of big old leather chairs, really low, and you get tea. So some of you guys know what I'm talking about. But in terms of the advantages of being a foreigner, I mean, thinking differently, because you know, I think I have this in my own country because of my family's background is not like a long history in Australia, that I'm sort of the child of two cultures. So if you come from overseas, you have two perspectives. Hopefully you have two. If you don't have the Japanese perspective, you don't really have anything to offer. If you have the Japanese perspective plus something else, then you can understand what's good and what's bad about both, and then you can start to try and bridge that. And that's a unique skill that I think being a foreigner or being what do they call it, a third culture kid, you can do that.
Yeah, there's something I'm hearing here, and I just want to see if I'm hearing it right. It sounds like when you're first starting out, when you're a small company, you can really leverage the uniqueness of being a foreigner and the novelty, but as you scale up, that advantage becomes less and less, and you need to become sort of more Japanese. Is that been your experience?
You have to be real. You can't just get by on none of us get by on novelty alone. We have to deliver. We might get a shot at it because they think, well, you know, we'll give them a chance.
But does the novelty scale up with the company, or is it become less?
Not in my experience. It's a door opener, essentially, right? But I think that, as Paul was saying, once you show that you can speak Japanese, essentially that's a signaling mechanism. That's saying, look, I get Japan, I get the culture, I'm not going to do anything crazy, right? Like, you can trust us to deliver on the things that we promised to do. So if you can show that, that's what gets you the that's what allows you to progress, but the novelty thing might open the door, maybe not, who knows.
Okay. So just to jump in one point there. So when we did our Series A round, we had to meet a lot of bank investment committees because we got money from all three mega bank funds. So I think it was 2 years before that day, maybe 3 years. Our chairman, Jonathan Epstein, who's in the crowd here somewhere. Hi, Jonathan. He introduced us to someone who said, if you got all three mega banks to invest, it'd be amazing, but have no idea how you're going to do it. Just give yourself a lot of time. But when I was there, our Jokyu Komon, basically, he did this thing that at the time I didn't know how to think, I didn't know how to feel about it. I was like a little bit, I won't use any more Japanese, a little bit conflicted because he said, oh, this is Paul, and Paul speaks Japanese, and Paul's wife is Japanese, and he could have just as well have said, Paul puts his kids in the bath and joins them every night.
He can use chopsticks.
Yeah, you know. I think he made me a 5th dan in Aikido, and I got my 4th dan a long time ago, but it's been a while. So that was nice, I got a promotion. But the upshot was he had to show them that you can trust him, he's familiar, I'm going to vouch for him. So he acted as a trust bridge. But now we've earned our own trust to an extent, and of course we do everything we can to keep it.
Okay. Actually, along the same lines, so none of us have Japanese co-founders. And I know in my own experience, certainly early on, around 2000 and such, when I was meeting with VCs, I would have tremendous pressure to have a Japanese co-founder, or it definitely made it harder to raise money. It made sales harder as well. And so I'm curious, what's been your experience? Have you had those questions? Have you felt those pressures? And how did you answer them? Casey, why not?
I don't think I got the co-founder thing right anyways, you know, with, I did, way back a long time ago. Yeah, like, really no, so, I mean, we started in professional services with recruitment, so we can become profitable pretty quickly. And it's a difficult business to scale, so you can kind of scale without a lot of VC money into there. So only when we decided on an exit and we started to shift into HR technology in the last couple of years have I gone around to VC, and yeah, none of them really loved me. I don't know if it was me or it was because we have recruiting company roots but are not that sexy, or not many people understand HR tech, or not many people understand SaaS, or we have 4 different business lines and people don't want a different business line.
As you started moving towards IPO, did those pressures, did you start hitting the questions then about having a foreign or a Japanese co-founder or more Japanese control of the company?
Absolutely not. And actually, you know, going back to the question about does novelty scale, is like we've gotten deep into this IPO process. The novelty is definitely scaling. Like there's not really many, maybe one foreigner that's founded and taken a company public in Japan. So as you start meeting the investment banks and like,
Is that Brian?
I think,
Yeah.
For
Valley
Valley
Commerce.
Commerce.
yeah, right. So the only one, but even like a lot of them don't know. Like most of the kind of investment bankers around auditors, they've never really met other ones. So you get a lot of reaction, and it's kind of easier to hire people as well as you're doing this. So yeah, I found it an advantage and nothing.
All right, excellent. Well, I mean, being able to stand out in a crowded market for any reason is an advantage. Jay, have you felt any of this pressure to have foreign or Japanese co-founders?
So, to some extent, but I think that in Japan, if that is happening, you don't find out about it directly, right? It's just kind of like, wow, really interesting company, thanks very much, we'd love to stay in touch with your progress. You're like, okay, right? Like, and like that could be for any reason, and it could be...
The long maybe.
Yeah, the long maybe, exactly, right? So,
Actually, believe it or not, that is progress. I was back in, I think it was '99, I was not able to open a bank account until I had a Japanese co-founder.
Oh wow, that's crazy.
Not alone, just a bank account.
That sucks.
You've got to remember that I think until the late 1980s, a foreign entity needed a Japanese partner to own about half of the company. I think China's still that way.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
we've come a long
So
way.
yeah, passive aggression is better than active aggression.
If you can choose, yeah, for sure.
You have to pick.
Yeah.
So we talked about this a lot. Our network wasn't very good, so we just didn't really know anyone at the time who would, one, take a chance on us, leaving some fantastic job to join this really tiny company 6 years ago. And the other thing is, I mean, just having a Japanese co-founder really helps in the early days, I imagine, because I haven't done it. But that's not really what you need. What you need is someone who speaks not Japanese natively, but speaks investor. So you need a CFO. And none of us were money people. Our chairman, Jonathan, was great. He had a great network, met my first VCs, but it took a really long time to kind of figure out how to get money out of them. He sort of turned them upside down and shook them by the legs. That didn't work. But no, when we finally got a CFO who came from Goldman Sachs, he is Japanese, and having worked at GS and being a Japanese banker, I speak Japanese pretty decently. I don't speak the language he speaks to investors. And that's, you know, it's if you're a lawyer, you speak to other lawyers in a different way. And so that's what you need really, is someone who can speak to that constituency, because I think, as we've proven to some extent, if you speak Japanese and you're not Japanese, you can make it work. But if you don't speak investor and you don't grow just purely organically from profits, then you're not going to raise money easily.
Well, I think there's a legitimate concern behind that, especially before a startup gets traction. An investor wants to know, I mean, can you guys really sell in Japan? Can you really operate here? Especially on technology-focused startups. There's a lot of foreign engineers who come to Tokyo, build some great software, and I think, you know, VCs have a legitimate concern saying, okay, well, can you really operate? Can you really sell it?
They're also secretly always wondering, oh, is he going to go home? I kid you not.
Yeah, no, I think so.
And you've got to show, no, I'm committed. I'm here. I was here on 3/11.
Right?
That was actually 2 days before my wedding.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah. Well, luckily the reactor wasn't so bad at that point, so I didn't get married. But when you tell them those stories, they're like, oh, you were here too.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I mean, that's the thing about trust comes from shared experience and shared understanding.
At the same time, the other thing is, the Japanese startup ecosystem compared to other places is still fairly early, right? There's still not a huge network of angel investors like there are in Silicon Valley that have kind of done everything and know the process. And I think that's happening now, and once that happens, and it's also in Japan, things are going to make a lot more sense. You're not going to be the outlier, you're just going to be another person doing a company in Japan.
I think so, but also I think that San Francisco is the outlier. So if you compare Tokyo to Silicon Valley, that's kind of unfair. If you compare Tokyo to places like London or Berlin, I think Tokyo's actually more advanced. If you compare it to places like maybe Singapore or Israel, less so, but in the same league. It's just, you can't compare anything to San Francisco, I think.
Okay, well, since I just made a comparison to San Francisco, let me...
It's not like
let me
illegal.
qualify
I think
this.
Timmy's not a good one.
Yeah,
Try again.
yeah, well, I mean, I think it's important to just take into account that, the Japanese startup ecosystem is at a certain stage, right? And once there's a lot more foreigners that have done IPOs, there's only one or two right now. Once there's 20, 50, it's just not going to be a big deal, right?
Hopefully it'll still be a big deal, but yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, sure, for the people going through the
you need
IPOs,
people to
absolutely.
lead you through it. And I think kind of going back to the point is, if you can get an investment banker to join you once you're scaling or kind of raising funds or going towards an IPO, I think that's just going to be a game changer for you, right? And if you're a foreigner, it doesn't matter. But if you have an investment banker, they'll speak very well to all the constituencies that they need.
I'd just like to apologise to Jay for my comment from before. But I don't disagree with you. I mean, we all compare ourselves in this ecosystem to San Francisco and New York. London does raise a ton of money in fintech, and it's like there's a lot of friendly jealousy. Oh, it looks so easy. Oh, they're making so much money. The thing is, in Japan we often look in particular Tokyo, because that really is the heart of the VC ecosystem here. We compare ourselves to San Francisco, we compare ourselves to Tel Aviv. There is nothing similar between Israel and Japan in that regard, other than, we all like technology. But a country that we probably could look at as a good example that's not so far away from us like San Francisco, and I don't mean in distance, but in maturity, it's Stockholm, Sweden. So you got Nicholas Zenstrom, Atomic, Zenstrom is the Skype founder. And he's putting a lot of that money back into the ecosystem through Atomic, which is his fund. And then you've got a bunch of companies like Klarna, which is a fintech unicorn. They seem to have that cycle going. We don't have a cycle happening yet. And I think there's a couple of reasons. There's no M&A, or there's very little. Serocom got acquired for $200 million by KDDI. That's huge improvement, because before, the only thing you could hope for, I think it was Webcash, what they called, or WebPay, acquired by Line for about 1 billion yen, so $10 million. 1 billion yen, it's like 1 billion cents. How much did you raise?
We are seeing an uptick in M&As for sure.
But it's not at the point where those founders are now out and then going, okay, I'm going to put my money into the next
I don't know if
generation.
that's-
And we need that to
I'm
to
actually
get
seeing
a
it
cycle.
a little bit differently.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot more M&A happen in the last couple of years, and just look at Cash, for example. It got bought for $70 million cash 6 months after it launched by DMM, and I know that founder's putting out money, and I know there's quite a few founders putting out money. So I think the money is flowing a little bit more, but the point's taken. There's still not.
It's early stage.
Yeah.
That's good. That's really good to hear, because without that, we're not going to get that flywheel going.
I met 3 people before the show tonight that were involved with M&A in Japan. So it is, they didn't tell me what their deal flow is like, but they're out there, there's interest, things are moving in the right direction.
I meant M&A of venture businesses
Yeah.
in the sort of the IT or the
Well,
sort of
not the
fast growth
distressed
space.
M&A stuff, the
Oh, okay.
actual,
Not
like
like
real
buying-
startup M&A.
Bailing out Jow or something.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the flywheel is still going to go. I think there's more money going, but it's such a small start is where we are now. And usually most of the founders have more than 50%. And Japanese VC want them to have a big percentage.
That's another problem. I'm sorry, there are a lot of, I don't know if I should say greedy, there are a lot of ungenerous founders in Japan. And I think it's not a case of they're doing that intentionally. A lot of people don't ask for stock options. They will happily break their backs working in a company and not get a lot of options. They should be asking for them. And the reason why is because it's very binary. If the founder decides to put out cash, great. If they don't, too bad, you're out of luck, and therefore no flywheel. But if one startup mints a few people with a couple of $1 million to spare, and they're thinking, I want to put half of that money into the next generation and mentor them, that's a flywheel.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the first generation of that right now. And the stock option thing is really interesting. Just from the founders I interviewed only like 3 or 4 years ago, it was really unusual for a founder to be giving his staff stock options. Now it is the norm. Not everyone does it, but it's unusual if you don't. And I think part of that attitude shift has been more and more startups are being founded by teams, be a group of people. So it's kind of this group from the start rather than, the one great man who establishes the company and just everyone else follows him.
There is a sort of a thing that probably most of you don't see. I didn't see it until I looked at my investment contract for Series B. And that was basically Shacho is seen as the company. And so you're handcuffed to it. And they don't ask to sort of lock anyone else in. It's just you, which is kind of short-sighted because you need your CTO, you need your chief of sales, you need all these people who are key founders, and you want to keep them for as long as you can. But I think it's just an old way of thinking, and it hasn't caught up. But yeah, it does seem to be going in the right direction.
Okay. But actually, another thing, and this is just something that I'm going to break my own rule in comparison to San Francisco. It's my podcast, my rules.
You're vindicated.
Yeah. No, but
Point still stands. It's a correct point.
Carry on, Tim.
But no, it is, even in San Francisco, foreigners have an oversized impact on the startup ecosystem. There's a very large number of non-Americans that start companies in Japan, and in the US and Japan. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on why that is? I mean, I've got my own, but I want to throw that to you guys first.
All the pilgrims go to Mecca, and at risk of sounding insensitive, that really is the heart of the dream of startups and venture in the world. So they all go to the Bay Area because...
But I mean, it's not just San Francisco. If you go to Singapore, there's a very high percentage. The percentage of startup founders who are foreign is much, much higher than the population. And within Japan as well, foreigners make up 2% of the population, but probably, I mean, I've never counted, but 8 or 9% of the startup ventures.
Well, I think it comes down to incentives as well, right? Like, if you're a Japanese founder, to some extent, and I feel like we've all been saying this for years, like, it's changing, right? Like, you can start a company and people will be like, oh, okay, great. But in America, that's a high five situation, right? You're starting a company, well done, high five, that's great. In Japan, there's still a large societal aspect of, oh, you couldn't get a real job? Oh, that's okay. Well, good luck with your company, right? Like,
That's Japan and my mother.
Well, there you go.
4 years ago. I now have a real job, apparently.
There you go, right? And so I think as foreigners, we just don't have that societal baggage. We don't have that expectation of what we should or shouldn't do put on us by people around us. And so I think we have, to some extent, a slight degree more freedom to look at something that should be like this. I mean, at the end of the day, doing a startup is an extremely egotistical activity. It's looking at the world and being like, that's wrong. It shouldn't be like that. It should be like this. And I'm going to make it like this. And I'm going to go out and I'm going to get a team together and we're going to change the world in this way because it's wrong how it is right now. And it's kind of, if you're a Japanese person, it's sometimes like you accept society as it is a little bit, right? And it's a little harder to kind of step outside that and make it change unless you've got a lot of societal support, family support, and all that kind of stuff. So I think from that perspective, foreigners have some advantage to, from that perspective.
I think it makes a lot of sense.
More of us can read TechCrunch. No, I'm kidding. No, I think we see this with immigrants, right? And so the question is, are we foreign founders, or are we new Japanese? And Diamond had an article on this. It's the only time I've seen it. They call it Shin Nihonjin. I read that and I kind of had these chills at my back because that's what my parents got called in the 50s, New Australians. I'm Australian, yeah. And so Australia was a destination and is a destination for people to emigrate to. Is Japan that? And I think we're at this point in history where Japan needs it, and government policy is just starting to say we need it. And let's look at Singapore, but I don't think anyone wants to go to that extent.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's never really been done. 100 years ago, after the Meiji Restoration, they had a ton of engineers come out to Japan from Europe with bringing skills that didn't exist. And but most of them knew that they were going to go back home. But are we going home or are we home? I mean, for me, is home Melbourne or is it Nakameguro?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think my impression of talking both with founders and with government officials is that particularly the company founders and that type of foreigner, they envision coming to stay and building companies and being here for the long haul. And I hadn't heard the Shin Nihonjin term, and that is weird. It's
Well, we speak Japanese, and my favorite gag is, well, I'll say it in English for the benefit of the listeners, but it's, "Hi, I'm Paul. I basically show them when I speak Japanese, and I say, "Oh, but my face looks like this," because people will say, "Oh, it's true. You sound like you're Japanese. If it was on the phone, I wouldn't know." And that's the greatest compliment, because when I was 18, I'm like, "I'm going to speak Japanese really well," and then locked myself in my bedroom for 10 years and just studied apparently. But my point is, it's possible, and that's a really new thing. Can someone be? I mean, sorry, I'm going to change the topic just briefly. Naomi Osaka, is she the new U.S. Open champion? Is she Japanese or not? And so I think
the Japanese are definitely claiming her.
Yeah, I would.
They'll take that hat.
Australia, we do that as well. We used to get Eastern Europeans and bring them in and say, "You're Australian now. Congratulations, go win Wimbledon."
Well, everyone does that. Obama was the first black president. Full stop. We don't get.
No, but that's just it. I mean, Money Tree, Wall & Case has many other businesses like Justa and Make Leaps. We're Team Japan. It's just konna kao shitemasu. I look like this.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. And actually, I think as well, if you can go to advisors like the kind of advisors that you've gotten, and as well at Make Leaps, we've been really lucky to get some really fantastic advisors. Dr. Semoto, the guy that founded KDDI, became our advisor, which was a huge deal, right? Like, that was great. And when you sort of go there and say, look, we're here, like you say, for Team Japan. Like, Japan is doing things right now in a way that's generating so much unnecessary work, and it's causing a lot of people to work 20 hours a day doing their invoicing at the end of the month, and that hurts people. They should be spending that time doing other more productive things. So we're here to try to do our best to try to fix that. And I think, if you're somebody like Dr. Semoto or a high-level advisor, you're kind of like, okay, well, yeah, it seems like your heart is in the right place, so we'll help you out. Okay, so, and then you sort of become part of that system.
Yeah, I'd say I'm kind of really curious how this is all going to turn out in like 10 to 20 years from now, because you're saying Shin Nihonjin, and I get the concept, but how many of us are really going to become Japanese?
Oh, I mean, when dual citizenship is a thing, I'll do it, because, look, let's put it this way. I have no plans to go back home anywhere except Nakameguro. I'm just talking about how I couldn't imagine living anywhere else but Nakameguro today. It sounds really bad, right? But the truth is, I have no plans to go back, except for business trips every 6 weeks, because we have a Sydney office and a Melbourne office. So maybe I've made that possible at Money Tree, and it is good for the company. But ultimately, I don't know either. Will Japan accept us? Will this thing that we've been doing still be accepted and supported? I think it will, but I don't know for sure.
I think so too, but it is an interesting two-edged sword with greater acceptance, because, I mean, Japan is a place that if you basically want to get along and follow most of the rules and are a bit eccentric and do your own thing and want to have people let you do your own thing, it's a wonderful place to do that. But yeah, as foreigners become more common in Japan, there might be more pressure to behave properly.
Yeah, it'll be weird.
Which
Like,
we
how does
understand.
it ebb and flow, right? I think we're having a wave coming in through Justa, which is a platform we have to hire for startups. We see a lot of foreign engineers.
Justa.io.
Awesome, thank you. We see a lot of really good foreigners, and we see a lot of really good product people coming in. I think you built this community of hundreds of people being here tonight. And this didn't exist 4 years before, and we got founders here, we're gonna have more and more founders. And as we actually start to have more of an impact in society, and we're not following all the rules out there, what's going to be kind of the backlash, and how's this all going to work? I think there's question marks over this.
Yeah.
But I think over the next few years, we're definitely going to see a lot more foreigners.
Let's bring it back to the present now, because one of the things, almost the archetypal mixed team is you end up with foreign engineers and Japanese sales staff, which, sure, that makes sense, but honestly, managing a company with mixed teams, it's difficult. You have to spend a lot more time on communication. It's less efficient in some ways. So, but other than just the access to a broader talent pool, do you think there's advantages to having mixed teams? Are there more creativity? Do people think outside the box more? Is there anything like any inherent advantages with mixed teams?
Absolutely. I mean, for a start, you have many different ways to look at a problem, much broader range of experience. I love the movie, I didn't read the book, so about Billy Bean, Moneyball, right? So I clearly have some deficiencies in the eyes of most Japanese investors. However, I was able to get the trust of a senior advisor who filled that in for me. So between me and him, we were a well-balanced founder to invest money in. So he filled the gap. Across the teams as well, the same thing happens. We have a CFO who's never worked in IT, but he knows a lot about IT now. But we filled in the gap. We didn't intend to teach him, he's just very clever, but he filled that in. So like a team is really made up of, even more so than a sports team, because not everyone has to do only one or two roles, fielding and batting and pitching. Across an actual company, it makes a lot of sense to have that kind of variety of ability. Also, right now, I mean, it's no secret, it's hard to get engineers, or it's hard to get project managers, it's hard to get marketers, digital marketers. Our digital marketer came from Berlin. I'd say we imported him, we invited him to join us. He came on a plane in a seat, not in a
And all your marketing is in Japanese.
That's right, but digital marketing is digital marketing. And it wasn't like that 6 years ago, but all the tools, everyone in Japan, what do they use? They use AppsFlyer, they use Google AdWords, I think it's changed its name recently, Facebook. The tools are the same. The domestic Galapagos tools have really mostly given way to tools that are made in maybe Singapore or the Valley or Tel Aviv, Berlin. And Berlin is a hotbed of talent for digital marketing. And so we get to take advantage of that. Now, on the flip side, if there was a team, and a lot of our peer companies are Junsui Japanese, so pure Japanese teams, when they start thinking, we need more people to help us, you know what they're doing? They're going to Vietnam and setting up shop there. But what we're doing is, I think, much more efficient. We're bringing the foreigners here, or hiring them here, which means we're much closer to the customer. And that makes the communication overhead lower. It means we can move faster. If you outsource to Vietnam or to India, you have the same problems with that. They're too far away from the actual users.
Yeah, and even bringing everyone into one place means you've got one team.
That's a big advantage as well. The challenges come from managing everyone's expectations. And I imagine my job these days is, other than just hiring people and finding good people, I have this big wrench and an oil can, and I'm running around oiling the machine, and whenever it goes clunk, 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 clunk in one area, I have to run there and do something. Otherwise, I stand back and let them do the job. And that seems to be the role. But with the foreigners, there's different problems to the Japanese staff. My CFO has a really good saying. He says, look, just because someone's a loudmouthed Australian, I don't think he was talking about me, or American, he didn't say loudmouth, he said they have a big voice. They're going to be heard in a meeting. But we have to give a megaphone to the Japanese staff so that their voice will be heard. And so we tell everyone that, so that way they know they can come to us. We get, sometimes it's back channel, because people often don't like confrontation. Sometimes it's not that at all, and it just depends on the person. But that's our policy. So we call ourselves a born global company, in that we're not a multinational company, we're not a foreign company, and we're not a domestic Japanese company. But we are a Japanese company.
Jay, you guys are about half foreign, half Japanese. But are there any intrinsic advantages to a multicultural team?
I mean, I've never run a company that wasn't fairly multinational, right? So it's hard to compare it to anything else. But yeah, like Paul said, I mean, it's nice to have a diversity of opinions, a different set of approaches to problems. But yeah, I guess the ability to also much more easily go international at some point as well. If your team's already configured like that, that's a huge advantage for you at some point when you want to do that, as opposed to starting from scratch. So I think a lot of Japanese companies, and I don't know how successful this has been, but they're like, okay, now the whole company works in English. But now we have an important meeting, so...
Rakuten stopped that.
Yeah, it usually does not work out very well.
Yeah, it's hard, right? So it's, you know, it needs to be built into the organization. Well, it's much easier for it to be built into the organization from an early stage, and that gives you a lot more places to go.
Does Megaloo teach Japanese and English both equally, or more or less interchangeably?
More or less interchangeable. It just depends on the groups of people that are talking to each other and meeting each other. So yeah, generally everyone speaks Japanese very well. But yeah, we have no particular kind of on-high dictation. You have to speak this language. It's whatever.
So no official language. What about, you guys have an official language?
English officially, but like we have 19 nationalities. There's all kinds of conversations going on in different
I
languages.
think you helped place someone at our company, so we have 20 now. So
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Wow. Wait, we have to get some more into
you
it.
better get off your backside.
I got
Seriously. But I think Jay's point was really good, and like as a foreign founder here, once you, I guess, get enough revenue going and market traction in Japan, like our really unique advantage is we can make global products, and Japanese startups almost cannot. And we can get the talent, we can get the product managers, and we can do it from here, and there's very little competition.
There is a hidden challenge there that we found out. So we have an app.
What's the customers?
So we always, takes a little bit of explaining. So we always designed the Money Tree apps from the perspective of universal design. So we always said, well, this will be a global product. This is something that will take overseas. But in the early days, we were confronted with the default thinking of the product space we were in, which was cable apps or personal finance apps. And in Japan, it's a very specific thing. And these days it includes taking a photo of a receipt. There's been a lot of arguments about whether we do that or not. But ultimately, you know, we built a kind of a millennial app for Japan, where there's only half as many millennials as in the US as a percentage. And on top of that, we ignored some of the what I would now call market requirements. Basically, there are some things where, regardless of how much you push the envelope in this market, they will expect this. And I think a lot of foreign companies make that mistake. And for us, we were sort of, you know, starry-eyed. We're going to change all this stuff. But building to what we thought was an international standard, it made it harder to succeed here because it was more. Because usually something succeeds in the US, then they bring it to Japan, and the first thing that they say is, well, if you try to push the envelope.
But in some ways, it's actually, it's sort of similar to the effect of the effect of having a foreign founder. Because you are doing something different, and it might look different and take more explaining, but you will get that interest and you will stand out for it. Listen, I've got time for one more question before we wrap up, but after that question, we're gonna have a Q&A session. So if you wanna have questions to ask, you can line up right over there. We'll get to you in just a minute. So my last question, I wanna ask, what is, and this is probably the question I get asked most by fans of the show and by my listeners, and what is the best advice you can give to foreigners who want to start a startup in Japan? And it can be about anything, but what's the most important thing that you'd say to them?
In Japan being the key component here, right?
Japan being the key component.
Don't.
No,
I wouldn't say that. It's easier now than ever.
No, I make the same joke all the time.
I would say don't do it lightly. Don't do it lightly.
What do you mean?
Well, we all suffer from fatal optimism as founders. I mean, Japanese, non-Japanese, we're all like Jay said, I'm going to change this and go do it. Hopefully, don't do it lightly. You're not going to be the great white or great non-Japanese hope. You will have more adversity than you expect, but less probably than we went through because time has marched on. I would say that do it if you really, really, really believe in doing something, not just to change the world and not just to make a business, but to do something good for Japan. people will appreciate that and that will come through in what you do. If you don't, you might as well do it anywhere else. Do it in Stockholm. They speak English there really well and it's a great ecosystem. Do it in San Francisco. Here, being a foreigner on the whole is not a big game changer, right? But everyone starts from where they are. So if you're a foreigner, you can't change that easily, even if you naturalize. So if you really feel you want to do that, like I think Jordan from Zehiyotomo is here, we spoke to him before, g'day. So he's doing something really cool. So he's introducing people to people who provide direct services. And sorry if we give you a free plug. And that's something I think that people understand. That's helpful for Japan. That's helpful for people who are unemployed. That's helpful for matching up people and getting rid of the middleman who just seems to just take money and not provide a service, which is maybe not a fair way to cast it, but that's a pro-social startup. So if you're a pro-social startup, like unlike most social gaming companies, then you will definitely have people who will say, I like what you're doing and I'm going to go out of my way to help you. And then that can snowball.
I'd say Japan's a slow market. It's a relationship-driven economy, so you have to be in it for the long haul. And it takes a lot of time to win a Japanese customer, but they'll stay with you for a very, very long time. And even if you make a mistake and you're willing to apologize, they'll stay. But like, there's not many exits. The road to IPO is at least 2 years if you get everything absolutely right at that point. And it takes a long time to build all that. So I think you have to be all in, like Paul said. And I met a lot of foreigners that have started companies and they don't want to take a bank loan of a sizable amount because you're liable for this. And I think if you have that mindset, you're probably not going to build something here. So I think just do everything is what I would say with a long-term horizon.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. I think in general, the slightly broader point is I don't think you should start a company unless you absolutely have no choice, right? Like I'll explain what I mean by that, right? If some people, I think, try to be an entrepreneur for like a career choice. It's like, oh, I saw it on TV. Oh, Shark Tank, that's interesting. I'll try that, right? And some people kind of try to do that. But if you have a problem that you cannot stop thinking about, that you're thinking about it all day, then you go to bed and you have a dream about that, and then you wake up thinking about it, you're like you just have no escape from it, then you should start a company, because that kind of motivation and drive is your eye on the horizon. It's, seeing the future and how it could be, and unless you have something like that, there's a lot of adversity in doing a startup, and sometimes it's pretty difficult, right? But if your eye is on the horizon, it doesn't matter what happens day to day, it doesn't matter if you have a setback or a problem or an issue, because your eye is on the horizon of, you can see how it's going to be once your startup comes to fruition, and once the world has changed in the particular way that you want it to be changed. So, to tie that to, once you've got that trust and momentum, it's a train. It's much harder to stop once you've taken off.
And really, that's two sides of the same coin. The difficult in getting the customer the first time is like mathematically equivalent to the ease of keeping them, because it's just as hard for them to change to a new vendor from you as it was for them to change from their old vendor to you. I think it's really interesting that we're all giving very similar advice, and I expected a big variation, but I think this just emphasizes how incredibly important this is. And really, my advice is quite similar as well, with one caveat. So it does take a long time in Japan, but there's also this kind of mythology that's built up around sales here, that it's some mystical process and that it takes years of relationship building and you just never know until you suddenly make the sale. And sales don't work like that here. They move through the same logical processes in Japan as they do anywhere else. Just takes a little longer. And the direct advice I would give to anyone who wants to start a company here, it is not only be willing to wait, but be willing to put your time into the ecosystem, to give to that industry community for a while before you expect to see results. So whatever niche you're selling into, show up to the meetups, not to push your product on anyone, but just to be there, to meet people and to introduce people. And then amazing things do happen. But it does take longer. So, well, we got to kind of wrap up this part of this part of the show, but we're going to have Q&A like immediately. So if you got questions, please step to the mic. And while people are getting their questions ready, let's have a huge hand for our panel tonight. All right. Questioner number one, step on up.
Thank you all. Thank you, Tim, for this platform that you created. The guests, you're obviously up here because of you know, the things you've gone through, the things that you've built. But I'm really interested to know what was the first major lesson that you had, the first big failure that I'd just like to get a feel for each.
You mean like a personal failure or a business failure?
Third one. Business failure that was, you know, the most valuable lesson for you. Unless this was the thing that you've achieved was the first thing, and I don't think anyone really becomes successful the first time around.
Well, I'll throw mine out there. The biggest mistake I made was kind of a combination of personal and business, and it was kind of like I didn't realize that nobody really cares about my vision. I mean, for its own sake. So I created this, what I consider to be amazing software, and I couldn't understand why no one else wanted to use it. And it took me a while to realize, like, no, it's not about me. It's about them. And so it took me a couple of years to get my head around that. And once I did, success came, I don't want to say easy, but easier. So that was my biggest failure.
Of course, if you're still standing, you haven't really failed in the end, so just keep going. But I think the first thing that I did wrong was I set up the initial team wrong. And we had a family atmosphere, and I don't think it should be a family atmosphere in a startup or actually really in any business situation. It should be a team, and a high-performing team, and everybody knows the role with the team and is accountable for it. But in a family, you have members that don't show up or you know, spend some time in jail or whatever it might be.
Very much like a sports team.
Exactly. I think Reed Hastings has said it. So, you know, I set it up family, hey, we're all going to get along, we'll take care of each other, and this is great, but there was a lot of low performance. People were going in different directions, and I had to clean it all out to replace it with a team. And I would recommend you don't do that.
Yeah, at Money Tree, I would say it might feel like family atmosphere, but this is a sports team. So even if I'm doing a bad job, someone should replace me. And I'm sure my co-founders would agree. Gotta keep me honest. My biggest failing was in my first startup when I was 23, which I started in a country which had no startup ecosystem really to speak of, or VCs at the time, which is Australia, and it's a long time ago. And we all chose bad co-founders. We were not right for each other. It was a bad marriage, and it was very, very messy. There were 4 of us. We 2 knew each other well. The rest of us didn't really know each other much at all. We'd all gone to the same kind of schools at universities in Australia. And that put me off startups for many years. And then I came back and found great people that I was working with at a company here. And then I said to them, hey, let's go do something else. And actually they said, I remember having this meeting in Roppongi near Midtown when I was trying to convince them to do Money Tree because we'd been doing apps. And they said, Paul, we want to know, would you do Money Tree without us? And my famous response was, what makes you think I'd let you not do Money Tree? And we're still together today. That's a heartwarming story, Paul.
Okay, so what I would say is my biggest mistake is I think really not deeply understanding the concept of leverage, right? So my first company that I did was a services company where we had engineers that went out on site, and the issue with services businesses to some extent is it's very difficult to scale them. Even if you get successful and you get a lot of business, you have to then go out and hire 10, 20, 50 people, and then if that client goes away for whatever reason, then you have a big kind of issue. So, yeah, once I kind of really clicked onto the idea of how powerful leverage can be with latest available practices in technology and software. That set the stage for being able to create a software company like MakeLeaps, and yeah, that was a huge ultimately.
SaaS is the way to go, for
That's
sure.
the way to go. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Next question.
So first of all, the great talk, and I'm from Tokyo Marine, insurance company, 140 years old, which is very conservative as you can imagine. And I'm in the IT division. And we got a lot of sales talk. I know how hard it is to get a business with this company for small companies, whether it's a Japanese company or a Belgian company. So, can you share with us what was the moment you broke through the barrier? Who you told, or what you did, or what word was moved to your client? Like I go to karaoke with CEO or something.
I'm gonna, please talk to me after the show, because I'm actually working with a number of companies on exactly this. But I'm gonna keep my answer short, just because there's a lot of people who are waiting. But I'd say that all sales, whether you're selling to an enterprise or you're selling to a one-person freelancer, all sales are personal. So it's still selling to what that one person wants, whether he's worried about his boss judging him or he's worried about what is competition, doing something first. It's enterprise takes longer, but it's fundamentally the same. You're selling to a person, not a company.
So we have our latest SaaS product. It's called Attune. Looks at intrinsic motivations for hiring organizations and team construction. And what we've found is actually Japanese large companies are pretty sophisticated buyers. Like they do a lot of research. They know exactly what's out there. They're very interested in new products, and they're quite happy to take you along in the process. But I think the key switch where we're happy to talk to them, and there's a novelty being a foreigner with a product that they're interested in Japan. But as Tim said, is we need a Japanese senior level salesperson to just take it through the whole process. Like we just can't do it consistently as foreigners.
I don't think you necessarily need that super senior guy. We always think, oh, it's the senior guy that's going to do it. For us, we keep selling until it's sold, and selling doesn't mean talking to them, but hearing their problems, so we do the Teian process, of course, because we're a Japanese company, and it's endless Teians until they've bought it. And of course, then it's like, well, I have this idea, and we take it to them, and then our champion takes it to their bosses, and they bring it back with some problems, and we fix the problems and take it back to them, and this endless cycle of proposals. And at some point, we have to decide, is it going to close, or we pull our resources back, or leave it for a while. So it's just the typical sales process, but it's elongated with time. So I'll give you an example. One of our clients is a big credit card issuing group. Some of you will know who that is. It took 2 years to close the deal, and it was one of our biggest deals ever because their app is built on our platform. So every one of their app users has become a Moneytree account holder because we're a financial data aggregation platform. We're not just an app. Took 2 years, but it was worth it. And we didn't have a super senior sales guy going in there. We didn't talk to the yakuin, the executives. But we went through the normal process, through the normal channels. If you go to the senior guys, it can backfire as well. It can also work. But it's just more time.
I don't know. I think in any startup, there's always various inflection points. But I think for MakeLeaps, the biggest inflection point was one day the phone rang. And this guy said, hi, I'm also running kind of a cloud invoicing company, and we just got bought by another company, and so the company that's buying us has decided to shut down the cloud invoicing part, and we're looking for somebody to take on all of our customers. We're kind of like, that's yes. It sounded great, but we were kind of like, well, okay, do you need my bank account details too? It just sounded like too good to be true, right? Like it was like a scam.
I need iTunes gift cards.
Exactly, yeah, as quickly as possible. What? So we had a meeting with that guy, and he came into the office and said, yeah, it sucks because I spent the last 2 years like putting my reputation on the line, like selling to all these companies, and now I'm just trying to find them a soft landing, right? Which I was really impressed by, right? Like that kind of thing is really, yeah, it's unique in some ways to Japan, I think, where it sort of feels like that's a little bit more common. So anyway, he sort of said, look, we're at the moment comparing between MakeLeads and a huge Japanese system integrator, and we've noticed at MakeLeads you're missing these 5 key features. So, you know, we'll probably give the big system integrator the big clients, and we'll give MakeLeads the little clients. And we're like, oh no, like if we do this work and if we build these features, we want all the clients. It's like, well, okay, well I have a meeting with them next week, let's see how it goes. I was like, do you have the list of features? It's like, yeah, sure. So I was like, okay, cool. So then I kind of ran back into the development section of the company and I'm like, hey guys, I've got good news and bad news. So the good news is we could just like double our customer base and get these really great customers. The bad news is, here's the 5 features we desperately need by the next meeting next Tuesday. What do you think? They're like, let's do it. Like, let's do it. Woo! Like, so, you know, we like worked all weekend, right? And then the guy came back in for the meeting on Tuesday, and he sort of said, okay, well, you know, thanks for your time again. I'm like, okay, we've done these features. We've done this one here. We've done the front end design for this one, but like this one, you know, there's a lot of stuff that still needs to be done, but this is basically what we're thinking. Is this kind of what you needed? He's like, you did this over the weekend? It's like, yeah, more or less. It's like, oh, okay. Well, I met the big Japanese system integrator yesterday, and they're having a committee meeting to decide whether or not they're interested to take on this project. And since you've already done all the features, you know what, you seem like you know what you're doing, we'll just give it to you. And so out of that list of customers came Rakuten. And Rakuten then became a customer, and then they became a partner, and then they became our investor for our Series A kind of round of funding. So that was a huge inflection point. It was awesome for us. Thank you. Yeah, sounds exciting. Thank you for the question.
Thanks so much. Okay, I think if we are super efficient, we can do 2 more questions. So snap right up.
Thank you very much. A very quick question, maybe not a funny one. I am pretty sure you guys had big troubles, like clash with either banks or employees or investors or any co-founder. And I was wondering, because you're in Japan, have you managed those clashes differently as if you were in your home country?
I'm going to give a more general answer to that. I think Japan, more than the US, which is the other kind of business culture I really understand, personal reputation counts for a lot more in Japan than it does in the US. It's when you sell something, when you go into business with someone, you're kind of either explicitly or implicitly putting your personal reputation on the line for that deal. So disputes have to be handled behind the scenes. Any drama is not helpful to anybody. But quite honestly, of all the problems that I've had over the years, it tends to wash out in the long run. You don't remember the problems, especially I guess if you handle it behind the scenes. But yeah, that's my approach to it.
Yeah, I think if we don't forget our problems, we couldn't keep going, right? If we just stuck on them. But I think, like, at least internally, like when you're clashing, it's because you have different values. Like your intrinsic values that you have are going to be different than other members of the team, and it doesn't matter across cultures. But kind of specifically to Japan, and this kind of goes back to the stock option conversation that we had before, is I've given away real shares to people early on in the company, and it's very hard to get those back. And they've moved on, not helping the company type of thing like that. And that's kind of, and because exits are so slow in Japan and you can't rely on M&A at all, that's why a lot of Japanese founders don't do it, because there's all kinds of horror stories of a lot of equity sitting outside of the company, and they're not aligned with your interests. So how you handle that, I think you have to do that very delicately in Japan as well. More stock options.
It's in the shareholders agreement. So don't let them exercise their stock options until there's an exit event, so that you don't have all these shareholders that used to work for you and maybe don't like you anymore, or just disagree.
That advice.
I have a good advisor. I think that one. No, but I mean, so would I do it differently? I mean, I am doing it differently. My first startup was not an abject failure. It was tough to get out of there with my stock. I was the CTO. I was 23, and it was bought by Thomson Reuters, which was cool. But it was an Australian company, so very small. And I vowed I'd never do that again. So I chose good co-founders, as I said in that previous story. But ultimately, I think this, if you start a company here, you will change because of it. But you'll change differently to if you compare yourself to starting in another country, because the environment's different. That's self-proven, right? It's a different environment, different experiences. You'll be a little bit different. I think, as Tim said, you don't air out your dirty laundry. You do it in private, and there's definitely a greater sense of not having a tantrum in public in Japan than, say, Australia or America, maybe France. I'm not sure. Ultimately, you have to be a better version of yourself every day. You have to be good enough to keep, if you're a founder, keep running the company that you're building, because one day you will be better than you are if you're not careful. So handling it differently, I mean,